So as I work with a client, I try to identify what area of the GRACE framework do they need the most support or help with. But usually all five of these pillars, GRACE, kind of stand on a stool and they hold the holistic model of wellness for an individual. And with type 1 diabetes, our risk of a permeable gut is high, or a leaky gut. And therefore we have to kind of pay attention to how does food make us feel. And I ask clients, I'm like, what did you eat yesterday? And they can't remember. And I wonder, how does this make you feel? And they can't remember. So the first step is really creating space in your life so you can be present. And that's, again, diabetes or not, this is advice that's welcome to everyone.
Welcome to the Type 1 and Midlife podcast. My name is Melissa Slemp, a certified nutritional health coach and the founder and CEO of Abundant Health with Melissa, where I help women with type 1 diabetes to feel more empowered and live their best life despite their diagnosis. Each week, I will bring conversations and strategies from guest experts and my experience living with type 1 for over 40 years now. So if you're a woman ready to redefine how diabetes can look and feel for you, then the Type 1 and Midlife podcast is the show for you. In today's episode, I welcome Kelly Schmidt, and today we dive into functional nutrition alongside type 1 diabetes. And Kelly is a registered dietitian and fitness instructor. And today she shares her journey from her own diagnosis at the age of 8 to what led her to becoming a dietitian. And she talks about how she empowers her clients through proven strategies to help optimize metabolism and just feeling good every day through nutrition and just having more of a mindfulness around food and how it fuels and serves our body. And in this episode, Kelly discusses her approach to nutrition, including tests like the CAR test, otherwise known as the cortisol awakening response, and the Dutch tests. And she shares secrets for easier diabetes control and explores the GRACE framework. So this is a framework that she herself has created and follows with her own clients. And it's to optimize long-term health. And she discusses all the pieces to that framework with us. And we also touch on how life stages such as hormones and insulin affects our gut health. Real interesting topic that I learned a lot about. So I'm definitely excited to share this conversation with you, and how it's all is linked to our insulin resistance and how we can better manage that. And she shares specific tests that we should be curious about, specifically as we age, in order to check our gut health and how the hormones are changing, and how these stages in life everything is changing, and how important it is to get those tests done. You can connect with Kelly on Instagram at Diabetic Dietitian, and you can visit her website, and you can see this, including the test that she talks about and shares with us and recommends with us today. All of that will be linked right here in the show notes. And be sure to share this show, rate and review this show. We'd love to hear your feedback. You can reach out to both Kelly and myself. And if you have any future show ideas or topics you want us to discuss on here, just let us know. So tune in, and I hope you enjoy this episode full of some practical advice that we can use around food and life as we age with diabetes. Enjoy. Nothing you hear on this Type 1 and Midlife podcast should be a substitute for professional medical advice. Please always consult your doctor before changing your diet, insulin dosages, or healthcare plan. Hello and welcome back to the show. We are in here this week with Kelly Schmidt. Hello, how are you?
Hi, Melissa. I'm excited and I'm stoked to be here. So thank you for having me.
Yes, I am very thankful to find you online. Obviously, we have a lot in common and we just keep bumping into each other, which I am sure is a sign that we need to get to know each other better. And what better reason to have you here on the show? And we both, because I work as a coach, and I coach nutritional help, but I'm not a registered dietitian. I don't claim to be. I really kind of use my own story and my own methods that work. It's funny, and I'm sure you'll get this too, because people with diabetes come to you. And one of the things they ask, and this is kind of a blanket question, is, so what do you eat? Because people just want to know what to eat.
Yeah,
So, and it's kind of like, well, I'll tell you what I eat. I'll tell you what works for me. And then it just kind of transforms into, really, it's about them. It's about their likes. It's about where they are and their food tastes and all that. But I think the basic principles are the same for all of us, even for those that don't live with diabetes, right? I think our our food kind of model really should be for everybody, which is really about
agree.
balance, isn't it? Yeah.
I agree. Absolutely. I would say diabetes helps us heighten healthy practices and it gives us the
Yeah.
opportunity and the nudge to be more consistent. And
Doesn't
it
it?
doesn't always work out, but it can be the guardrails that's, oh, this is my lifestyle. This is where I need to go.
Mm-hmm.
This is where I need to focus. This is what I need to do to make the
Mm-hmm.
best days ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think because I've been kind of following this, not my whole life is living with type 1. Gosh knows when I was younger, I had no idea about food or how my body was responding. I didn't put feeling bad with how I was eating with blood sugar or hormonal stages. I didn't know anything back in my 20s. I was just a hot mess. So thank goodness I've stopped and paid attention and just kind of recognizing the trends, which is really probably how you do yourself and how you help others to do, define what eating plan works. So tell us a little bit. Let's start from the beginning and just tell a little, kind of introduce yourself to our listeners about your own life with type 1 diabetes.
Yeah. So I'm Kelly Schmidt. I'm a registered dietitian. I'm based up here north in Columbus, Ohio. And I've lived a little bit of everywhere. I was in Chicago for over 10 years and I lived in Australia for 2, which
Mm.
was kind of life changing because it's a different culture, a different way of living. And moving home back to the US, I had more culture shock than going away, which overall, what I'm getting to, it played a huge role in how I practice as a dietitian. And I really lean into the holistic and functional realm of it. But my type 1 diabetes began on my 8th birthday, and a virus went through the household. I was one of 4 kids, and we were all 1 year apart. So we're all Irish twins, so really close, a really big family. And I was the last one to get this virus, and it hit me the hardest. And I just kept wanting to drink orange juice. And that's an ironic thing, but when your cells are starved of glucose, your brain keeps saying, give me more sugar, give me more sugar. So I was craving and craving orange juice. My mom knows I was using the restroom a lot. And nervously, she's like, I have a sense what might be happening here. My dad is type 1. My dad, his
Oh,
brother, his
interesting.
sister
Oh, wow. Okay.
all had type 1 diabetes. So it wasn't foreign. The symptoms weren't foreign. And I went to the pediatrician. He checked my urine, found glucose in my urine or sugar in my urine. And my blood sugar was only 240 when I was
Mm.
diagnosed, which is pretty good compared to many stories. But my mom will say it's still overwhelming and still hard.
Mm.
So I got diagnosed when I was in 2nd grade, and my dad had been diagnosed since he was 17, and he
Mm.
was the oldest. He was the second one in his family to get it. And right when I got diagnosed, he thought, I need to really take care of myself so I can be a better role model for Kelly. And he had such different medicine. He had such different tools, different education,
Mm.
recommendations. I remember him telling me when he was diagnosed, his doctor told him not to tell anyone. And some of his closest friends didn't know he
Wow.
had type 1 diabetes. And I think that's very different to today, where it's I whip my arm out, take a shot in public, and have no hesitation to advocate my needs. But I think there's pros and cons to both of it. And
Mm.
nonetheless, my dad has had almost every complication from type 1 diabetes. And
Mm.
it's been gut wrenching to watch. And he's still alive today, but it's not without a fight. Um,
Mm.
I could get emotional, but nonetheless, he is the spark. His journey is the flame of me paving a way for others to do it a little differently and to help people get in the driver's seat of their type 1 diabetes, because our management is very different from one person to the next, and not just because our tastes are different, but our
Mm.
biology, our gut health, all of our needs are different. So um, when he had one of his complications, that was in February 2002. I was in high school and I was figuring out what I wanted to be when I grew up and where I wanted to go.
Mm.
And he got a dual kidney pancreas transplant. And that
Mm.
was really scary. But from that, in the waiting room, praying he would get through it, I identified like I want to help people be creative with food and use food as medicine.
Yeah.
So I went and became a dietitian and had a few roles, include living overseas in Australia, and came home in 2012 and opened up my own private practice, coaching people on blood sugar management, autoimmune disease, gut health, and more.
Yeah, yeah. And I've been following you for years, and it's just recently that I've just kind of reconnected with you. So,
Yeah,
you bring up a really good point, and the value that you can offer because you know the struggle, you've witnessed it within your own family. How important upon diagnosis, or as quickly as we can get with these people that are diagnosed, just empowering them with this education. And maybe that's something that you're seeing too with people that are coming to you is, and it may be at any time during their diagnosis too, any stage, is the confusion or the resentment around what it's going to look like. And, because food is something that, I mean, it's socially enjoyable.
yeah,
There's a lot of emotions or yeah, there's a lot of emotions or even just stigma around what we're eating, who we're eating with. And that can be, I think, is the biggest block or the
yeah.
biggest hurdle.
Oh, yeah,
So yeah,
yeah,
it's so, and if people can start there, and just kind of branch off with other things, because I think it does start with that feeling of, I don't like the word control, but that that ability to choose and that ability to make sound decisions about what they're going to eat. Because I think
yeah,
what happens, and this is what happened to me early in my diagnosis, was I was just so disconnected to what it was all about, and then I didn't even want to learn. I was
yeah,
just disconnected, and then that's when the resentment kind of built in,
yeah,
and that's where the self-sabotage can, and we've done episodes on this too, which it's one thing that can lead to another. But if you can start with food, which I think is so
yeah,
important, and it's not all about food, we know that, but it does start with having those, to be educated and to be equipped to feed ourselves well, to manage our life and our blood sugar. Yeah,
yeah.
and gosh, what an amazing role that you can play. Yeah.
Yeah. I keep thinking food is pleasure, but food is fuel. And it can be
Mm-hmm.
both at the same time. And as you know, with type 1 diabetes, our risk of eating disorders or an unhealthy relationship with food is high. And that we do need to simplify it. Like, I hope my wording is not overwhelming anyone, but we can be so empowered to completely change the way of our future with our fork. And it's
I
one
love
bite
that.
at a time, and it can be
Mm-hmm.
really simple, but we can't give food too much power where, let's say we're trying to restrict something, it's just going to get louder. But we just got to feel empowered that we can change the way with our fork, and just to be really curious to pay attention to how our numbers look with food and how food makes us feel. That's what I always tell
Right.
clients. How does a meal make you feel? How was
Mm.
your dose of insulin marry up with that? And how long did it keep you full? And it's just one meal at a time, one day at a time. And if it didn't feel right, if your gut feels off, you feel inflamed, you feel fatigued, there's so many different symptoms, expressions of how food's working for us or not, um, that we can course correct from day to day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Using that data to our advantage, right? Yeah. Yeah. Cause then, and then we'll have those meals that it seems like a train wreck.
Yeah.
Pizza,
Yeah.
pizza, pasta, all those things or cereal. I remember cereal as a teenager, and not understanding why it was so bad for me and why my blood
Yeah.
sugars were so much harder. Again, I had no education about what that simple carb really was doing to my blood sugar. But that sets up, it's a that's a never ending battle with
Yeah.
with the choices on our plate. So that's good stuff. I appreciate that. So you mentioned that you have some T1D secrets
Yeah.
to make it easier. I can't wait to hear this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what can you share about that?
I think I'll first step back and just mention a framework that I've worked with patients unknowingly for the first few years. So I've been in private practice for 12 years now. And as I work with clients, I try to identify like where they need the most support. And as I scale the radar, it comes down to 5 pillars. And I call it my GRACE framework. And I think when I look at the GRACE framework, it's kind of a tool, an outline of how to have easier blood sugar control. And the GRACE framework, number one, I think I'll jump to the most important thing is with type 1 diabetes, the cornerstone of good control is a routine. Like we can't over or underestimate the benefit of a routine. It's good for mental health, for the brain to have an anchor of what to rely on, but also our digestive system. You know, if we eat 3 meals, let's say we're eating 3 meals a day, hopefully, not skipping. Let's say we're eating 3 meals a day, our digestive juices, our digestive enzymes will be prepared for those consistent time frames. And if our enzymes are being produced, we can digest and absorb more nutrients than we would otherwise. So I think if anyone were to walk away from today's podcast and our conversation is what small or large routines can you sketch out and do more consistently? And again, it doesn't have to be robust. And the goal of routines is not to cross off each step of the way, but is to meet the objective of, in the end, targeted blood sugar ranges. But my GRACE framework, I jumped ahead to letter R in the word GRACE, but G is gut health. And type 1 diabetes, even type 2 diabetes, we're set up for more, what's the word I want to use? I feel like it's a Monday. With type 1 diabetes, our gut is at risk of being more permeable than the average healthy person. Dr. Fasano is a researcher I really enjoy, and he's one of the lead researchers in celiac disease, another autoimmune disease, which overlaps a lot with type 1 diabetes. But he has found a lot of research and written a lot of studies and so forth on how anyone with an autoimmune disease has some form of a leaky gut. And with that, and when I lived overseas, when the grocery shopping and just the food experience was quite different than what I was having in Ohio or Chicago, the more real food we eat, the better, of course. You know, the less, we don't want to aim for processed foods. But I think this is where I was talking about when we eat a meal, how do we feel? And I know there's certain foods that make my blood sugars really sticky and high. And anyone listening to this podcast with type 1 diabetes, I wonder if your certain foods that might make your blood sugars questionable. Like, why doesn't insulin work like the ratios that work for everything else? And I wonder, is it a food? Is it an ingredient that the gut just doesn't tolerate well? So that's where the G is in GRACE framework. So it's optimize gut health, have anchored meals from one day to the next. That can go a long way just digesting those nutrients, eating as close to the farm as possible without stressing, to make sure you're getting an abundance of nutrients, and try to not eat the exact same thing every day. Because if we eat the exact same meals every day, average Americans eat the same 15 ingredients on a weekly basis, we can create nutrient gaps. So every time you go to the grocery store, try to rotate what type of vegetables you pick up or fruits, or be brave and just try something new. And the G
I just wanted to ask you too, because that brings up something I was just thinking about. And there's easy ways to do that too. I mean, obviously, like you said, just maybe trying a new, and I'm just going to throw one out there because radishes is mine. I have this thing about, because we're real lucky to have a farmer's market. So every Saturday I can go. And it's funny how, and I am guilty of this, I eat a lot of different vegetables, but I have my own little block up about certain vegetables. And I don't know where that's ingrained in you. And it does tend to be the root vegetables, because I will look at them on the table at a farmer's market. And I mean, like, I'm not quite sure what to do with it. And that's my own block. That's my own mental, and that's just a silly thing. I'm being completely honest. So what I've been doing is I've been asking the people there, or I'll ask somebody that's picking it up, like if you're like in a crowded market and you see somebody picking up a vegetable that you're interested in, just say, oh, so how do you cook that? How do you, I mean, worst case is worse. We could always go home and, look on, your website or somewhere to find a recipe that's going to pair with it. But radishes is mine this week. And there's different species of I'll call them species, but different types of radishes. And guess what? I'm now liking radishes. Yay.
I
so
love
radishes. Never say never, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. I love this point you brought up. And radishes are good just sliced and then stored in the fridge for over a week in water. So they're really like fresh when you bite into them. And I love the pepperiness, and they're so good roasted. If you just dice them up and roast them, phenomenal. Very good stuff. But I love that. And yeah,
Yeah.
ask questions. I think the best thing we can do with type 1 diabetes, and even if you don't have a disease state, is just advocate your
Mhm.
needs. And that comes to just asking questions.
Yeah.
Just asking questions, especially to the farmers, and it creates community, it creates
Mhm.
connection. And
Mhm.
it can go, you never know what you can learn.
Yeah, good
Definitely.
point. Mhm.
And please interject because my grace framework,
Sorry.
I'm going to keep it, I'm going to keep it high level, but if anything sparks your interest, let me know.
Absolutely. Appreciate that.
So as I work with a client, I try to identify what area of the grace framework do they need the most support or help with. But usually, five of these pillars, GRACE, kind of stand on a stool and they hold the holistic model of wellness for an individual. And with type 1 diabetes, our risk of a permeable gut, not but permeable
Mhm.
gut is high, or a leaky gut. And therefore, we have to kind of pay attention to how does food make us feel. And I ask clients, I'm like, what did you eat yesterday? And they can't remember. And I wonder, how does this make you feel? And they can't remember. So the first step is really creating space in your life so you can be present. And that's, again,
Mhm.
diabetes or not, this is advice that's welcome to everyone.
Yeah,
Um,
really good.
but to optimize the gut, we need to get 5 colors of meal. These are high goals, but 5 colors of meal is a little something to reach for. At least 5 colors a day. And each meal, you want to have a base of protein, fiber, and fat, so you can absorb those fat soluble vitamins, but also support gut health and hormones and skin and so much more. So gut health can go on and on. I can make a whole podcast just on letter G, but I'll slide right into routines. And I kind of leaned on this already, but it's just so helpful, as many of us know who have had type 1 diabetes for a month or a decade or more, that it's helpful to have consistent meal times.
Mhm.
Those consistent meal times can help us make our insulin needs more predictable, our portions more identifiable, and it forces us to plan a little. And the routines are, there's so many parts that you can dissect and work through. It can involve exercise. What time of day for someone is it better for their blood sugar control to commit to a class? Is it morning? I find morning workouts, my blood sugars are really sticky and stay steady. If I work out at night after dinner, I just always tend to drop.
Mhm.
So it's important to know these things about ourselves so we can move forward with ease. Um, and of course, with routines, the number one thing besides the consistent meal times that I've reiterated a number of times is sleep is the secret sauce of health. Sleep is the secret sauce to health. And if we don't get
Mhm.
sleep, we're kind of spinning our wheels. And I know
Mhm.
with the season of life, I turned 40 last year, that sleep can become more fragile. And on this pillar of routines, I'll work with clients like what areas or what tools or strategies can we bring in to support that quality of sleep and also quantity. And it
Yeah.
can be supplements, it can be the simple stuff like a weighted eye mask, which I use every night. It's so
Mhm.
relaxing.
Mhm.
And the perfect room temperature and paying extra for those blackout curtains and so forth. But really
Yes,
make sure
yes.
you're getting sleep, because even if we're sleep deprived 6 hours or less, we create insulin resistance as we get out of bed in the morning. So those are two
Yeah.
big pillars that can go on
Yeah.
and on. But the third pillar I have here, which goes into kind of your audience, you told me your demographic, and that's adrenal health. Do you talk to your clients very much about adrenal health?
Yes, and you started with the
Yeah.
sleep and the because that's it starts with the sleep, because that's a
Yeah.
downward spiral that's creating, and that's generally speaking, and maybe you can talk more into this, is that sleep is going to it's generally impacted by cortisol, and cortisol impacts sleep. It's kind of a vicious cycle, isn't it? So yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely something. And again, it's like you said, the routine. It's looking at what they're doing throughout the day without putting a microscope on it, or it doesn't come with judgment when we're talking with our clients. It's really getting to understand them, and they get to understand themselves. It's amazing
Yeah.
too. The more that you sit and you talk, and they hear themselves kind of explain, or just kind of talk through their day, it's amazing how the light bulbs go off. They're like, oh, okay, well, this
Yeah.
is starting to make sense now. So it's
Yes.
very therapeutic, just to say
Mhm.
it out loud, and to have somebody that they can share it with, especially somebody that wants to listen, because generally speaking, who wants to hear all about your day, right?
Yeah,
Who
yeah.
wants to really learn about what you're doing? But it's so impactful. But so, yeah, the long answer to your question is adrenals is key, and hormones are playing a big part of that as well. It's all
Oh,
one
yeah.
big hormonal bubble, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And each of our systems, it's an orchestra. They don't function in a silo. And type 1 diabetes really impacts our adrenals. If we have dropping blood sugars, we can spike cortisol. If we have a food sensitivity that we're consistently enjoying, we can spike cortisol and drive inflammation. And often, too, I find with many of my clients in type 1 diabetes, we have learned that we need to take care of ourselves to manage our blood sugars and not have, big spikes or seizure drops. That we're good at to-do list. And often with my clients, I'm like, less is more. Again, it's a reminder to make sure you're creating space to take a deep breath and be present with yourself, and also in some way have some restorative time in your week. And maybe that's restorative yoga. Again, I'm going to my own interest, but you need to find your thing that helps you unwind. And I'm the biggest fan of walking. I think walking is medicine for blood sugar control and also mental health, but also just to support those adrenals. But when I work with type 1 diabetes, I do see adrenals need a lot of support. And there's a test I like using. I like using functional labs, and just to measure someone's cortisol awakening response, a CAR. And that's kind of like a mini stress test. And if our CAR, that's your cortisol levels within the first 90 minutes of waking up, if it's off, it can kind of predict your blood sugar control for the day. So this is a really important pillar to identify, to nurture on a daily basis. And again, just to help people simplify their schedules and goals in life, because overwhelm just lands right on this pillar right here. And
Yeah.
also, as we transition in perimenopause and menopause, our adrenals take over a lot of that production of estrogen. And if our adrenals are tapped out, we're going to have hormone imbalance, and then we'll have all of the night sweats, the estrogen dominance, the symptoms that no one wants to welcome. So this is a big one that I work on with clients too.
Oh, awesome. Let me ask you about the adrenals one more time, because you just mentioned something that I have never really thought of, and because I've heard of obviously the cortisol test, which is it's generally more of a 24-hour saliva test, right? So
Correct.
And the test you're talking about, I've never heard it termed the way you have just termed it. So the CAR,
the
the
CAR.
cortisol, I love that, and wow, that would be very valuable for any of us, but especially those of us going through hormonal changes. So is this a test that is being more used, recognized, something to bring up with our endocrinologists?
This is the tricky part. I think in 10 years, conversations will be so different than what we're having right now. And I don't think endocrinologists would pay much attention to doing a cortisol 24-hour saliva test. They would do probably a blood test to do one collection of cortisol to see if it's within a range, but by no means will it give us a picture. It's kind of like the endocrinologist back in the day. And I do not want to offend anyone. I appreciate every endocrinologist who goes through all the studying and all the hard work and the demand that they have upon them. But a cortisol blood test is kind of like when we would, back in the day, people would go into the doctor to get a blood sugar test for the day. And it's telling very little, a story that you have no idea what it is. So the saliva test, I use a Dutch, like the Netherlands, but DUTCH, a Dutch adrenal test. I also like the Dutch hormone test too. And I usually, with perimenopause women, I do Dutch Plus. It does collection of the hormones and also the adrenal as well. But yeah, what I find is these functional labs completely change the game on people's engagement and motivation to create change. So it is usually an investment, an out-of-pocket investment, but it has just a different trajectory. And also, I don't like treating symptoms. It can be dangerous. I really want to understand what's going on under the hood to identify truly what do you need? Because what Melissa needs is very different than what Kelly needs, even though we have the same disease. By no means are our needs the same whatsoever.
Good point. Yeah.
Did I answer that well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's something that I'm going to definitely add to my own toolbox, because
Yeah.
that is something, and definitely bring up with the doctor and to recommend, and again, I have friends that are, going through menopause, perimenopause into menopause, that are having these issues. And I've definitely, so this test is different than the 24-hour collection, or is it the same as
It's
far
the
as the
same.
saliva? Okay. So it
The
is the same.
saliva 24
Okay.
hours the same. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And then all these labs, they just have different reporting. I like the one by Dutch. I like the one by Genova.
Yeah. Yeah,
There's a
those are two I'm
handful.
aware of. Awesome. Really. That's really good information.
The only thing is, it's really interesting is politics, but states like New York specifically, I'm on the East Coast area.
Mhm.
A lot of these labs can't be done there. So
Mm,
if people have questions, just send me an email. I'll help
yeah.
identify like workarounds because it takes creativity sometimes to get the answers we need and so forth.
Yeah. And it also takes a doctor or a practitioner like you that understands the labs.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that's something I'm hearing too. That's why a lot of OBGYNs, there's exceptions to this, but generally speaking, they don't tend to order tests, depending on what your symptoms are, because they don't really understand the values. They don't really understand how to interpret or to treat what they see. So I think
Yeah.
that's the same sort of thing with this cortisol too. It's right. Yeah. You can get the
Yeah.
information, but then what do you do? Where do you go? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love where our conversation is headed. So I'm quite transparent with my health, and I hope my stories help others find their needs and so forth. But
Mhm.
I just turned 40, and 2 years ago, I was 38, and I did a Dutch hormone test on myself. And that's a dried urine and saliva test, looking at my hormone levels and cortisol and so forth. And with my family history, I'm one of various women that are sisters or cousins. And I would say a majority of these 40 something year old relatives are in early menopause. So it's on my radar, and I'm paying attention to symptoms and looking at functional labs on myself. And of course, working with my endocrinologist, asking for various things and so forth.
Mhm.
And I did a Dutch test on myself, and I went to the gynecologist and I showed her the results. And I was like, look, my hormones are low, my cortisol's flat, this, that, and the other. And I asked her opinion on prescribing me bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. And she was apprehensive, and she heard my symptoms, and I showed her the report. She was like, I've never seen a Dutch test in my life. Like, she was like, what is that? And I was like, well, it's this test I do. And I tried to downplay it, but I was just showing her data, but that aligned with my symptoms and so forth. So I advocated that I am on progesterone just to help with insomnia, insulin resistance, and mood. But I think these functional labs may not be recognized by our common practitioners, but they can also be supportive that align with our symptoms to have bigger conversations. And also, and I'm sure you know this, women with autoimmune disease, including type 1 diabetes, we tend to have menopause earlier than we would otherwise.
Mhm.
So that was another stat for me to bring to the table and help recognize, like, I would like to support my hormones in all ways possible to, and my big saying this month is to defy the odds. I want to take care of my bones, I want to take care of my brain, and I want to
Mhm.
support my varying insulin levels. So, yeah, I just wanted to add that story in case it relates to anybody who's listening.
Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate that. Yes.
Yeah. Should I move on to my framework?
Yeah, let's
Yeah,
go.
I don't want to
I'm
go too
learning a
long. So,
lot. Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
when I work with
Yeah, we can
clients,
circle back after.
of course, of course. When I work with clients, I don't go into the call and say, okay, we're working on the grace framework. We're going to start here, here, and here. I always just continue to listen to the story, look for red flags per se, and string together what will be most supportive for them. And then if needed, I'll recommend a functional lab. And then I'll scale it against this grace framework. So G is gut. That's a number of things. With gut, just think of eat as close to the farm as possible and pay attention to how food makes you feel. And look at your bowel movement. You should have a bowel movement every day. When people are
Mhm.
like, oh, I go to the bathroom every few days, like, we need to work on that.
Yeah.
Because the body needs a detox. You don't want to reabsorb those toxins from your bowels, let alone
Mhm.
estrogen and so forth. And then routines, sleep, meals, so much more. Adrenals, we just had a great discussion on that. And then the fourth pillar here, I remember one of our past conversations, Melissa, we were talking about preventative measures of, I know that I take on, and I'm pointing myself out because I don't want to put your claim on this. I partake in to prevent any complications and to optimize my health. And that's some form of a real food cleanse, but also scaling the radar of where toxins are existing in my environment. And toxins are abundant. Babies being born have over 200, 300 toxins in the umbilical cord. There's a study in, I'm going to get these numbers wrong, but the gist will be there. So the study was like 2006 and compared to 2016. And it was a study done on Americans and individuals in the UK. And what they measured in 2006 was how many toxins per cell are there. And it was around 100. And then they did it just a decade later, and the amount of toxins per cell were up to over 500. And I don't have those numbers exactly right, but the exponential fold is there. And where I'm getting at is there's a lot of things that are not fully regulated in the US compared to other countries. And this study even included those European countries. And toxins are just present. They're in the body products we put on ourselves. We absorb 70% of what goes on our skin. I think the best thing I did for myself was probably a handful of years ago was switch to natural deodorant. I mean, not many hours of the day do we go without deodorant under our arms. And that's just one simple step to take, but also thinking through, okay, what kind of hand soap do you use? What kind of lotion do you use? Do you wear perfume? Do you have plugins in the house? And just be aware of the scents. And are those essential oils, or are they something artificial? Artificial, what we don't want. So clean living. So it's gut, routines, adrenal health, and C is clean living. And that's scaling the radar of like toxins in our environment and then supporting our detox pathways. And I'm going to be redundant here, but the best thing you can do for yourself for your detox pathways is, again, to decompress and be present. Because when we're stressed, that cortisol, all those other hormones will shut down detox pathways. So again, getting the sleep, simplifying, taking deep breaths, and having some restorative practice in your week, something to look forward to, if not daily, can go a long way. So that's what my C is. Do you have any questions on clean living, toxins?
No, I love it. And that's something that I'm starting to, unfortunately, I'm starting to talk more about this topic with my clients as well. And and the questions are coming up, and it's good questions. Is there an easy way or a more of a direct way that you approach this? Because it can seem overwhelming. I think that's one of the first things. It's like, oh my gosh, where do I start? So do you start with a room in the house? Do you start maybe with your body from head to toe? I guess there's lots of different ways that you can just simply get started to kind of mark it off a list. I guess we can call it a list, but really that, or maybe starting, and this is something too, I just had a conversation with somebody about this, is really just kind of looking at all these different parts of our body and our environment. And we get so used to just doing and touching what we touch, but really just kind of sitting in it and just thinking about what is in our environment on a consistent basis. And maybe, I don't know if that's the easy answer to this, but it's really just assessing it, right? Is that kind of how you do it?
I would say it's individualized, just like when someone wants to work on their food. It depends. Do we start with the first meal of the day and just master that and move on? For each person, it's a little different. And then with clean living, I usually recommend when you finish up a product, examine if there's a better alternative. And that can be your toilet cleaner, or it could be your candles, or it could be the frozen food you're buying. And I'm not saying, I don't know why I chose frozen, but usually it's coming in a package. But really scaling those ingredients, when I work with clients, it's not just what we eat, it's the quality and the timing and quantity. But people usually look at a food label, look at the calories and the carbs and the protein. But the most important information on there is the ingredient list. And just scanning that and removing anything that's chemicals. I think of, as women, we need protein. We need protein at every meal to support our satiety, support our sarcopenia, support our depleting muscle mass after age 28. And it's important that we turn on our muscle stimulating processes and to have enough protein. And it comes down to having convenient sources. And one of the convenient sources can be like a grass-fed jerky stick, or it could be high quality deli meat. And that's like, people are cringing because they're like, well, there's so much sodium. But we need to have convenience, modern options. And there's a lot better brands than other ones. So there's always good, better, best. And again, ingredient list on deli meat, a preservatives can be celery salt versus that, butyrate, nitrate, sulfites, citric acid, and so forth.
Good points. Yeah.
And that can be part of clean living. That can be part of clean living. But reach for the low-hanging fruit where you can see obvious things to swap out.
Obvious things.
I do use Thrive Market a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Thrive Market's an online grocery store that has a membership fee, maybe $45, but they kind of do the first filter of quality products. So I find them as a shortcut, and then I order a lot of my lotions, shampoos, essential oils, candles, nut butters, oils, snacks, and so forth from Thrive Market out of convenience, but it helps do that first research layer of cleaner sources.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you bring up a good point too. So like many of us have, there's lots of healthy, uh, natural health food stores. I think there's one here in my town. But we still need to walk in with a little bit of curiosity as far as what we're seeing, because just because the sign on the door says natural food store or market, right? There's still, they're doing the best they can with what they're sourcing, but still got to look at those ingredient lists, don't we?
Yeah. A lot of stores, even Trader Joe's, that's a common place around me, has like a health halo. There's a health halo on everything in there. And as I'm giving all this advice today, make sure whoever's listening, make sure you're not comparing your chapter 1 to my chapter 12. I've been at this game a lot, and I just layer on when it's doable. And sometimes I take 2 steps back and 3 steps forward. But Trader Joe's, a lot of their food is great. And there's a percentage of food that they make with canola oil. And canola oil is an oil that I highlight to my clients to try to avoid at all cost. And of course, you're going to go to a restaurant. I'm not going to say don't eat by any means, but canola oil could be like something favorable to remove from our diet just because the high omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, which just can help fuel inflammation. But yeah, so many stores have a health halo. People go into Whole Foods and think everything here's a go. But again, I could argue a handful of things in there.
Still got to be cautious. Yeah.
Yeah. But again, food is fuel and pleasure. And sometimes pleasure is more worth it than to be perfect. So have a good balance with that. And if your meal doesn't have pleasure, it's so easy to overeat and be dissatisfied and then graze. And then at the end of the day, goals aren't met. So make sure you're serving the pleasure within you, but also reaching for more wholesome ingredients at the same time.
Yeah, really good. Really good. Kind of that 80-20 rule for sure, right?
No, yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
With plate and in life.
Yeah. And then my last pillar of my GRACE framework is exercise. And I thank my type 1 diabetes for the consistency I have with exercise. I find if I go more than 48 hours without like a proper exercise, 45 minutes, I'll build insulin resistance. And it's just good for all of us to move, to not sit too long. They say the sitting's the new smoking. And my favorite, as I've already mentioned, is walking. Walking is so gentle on the body. It's good for the mind. It can help with digesting and producing bile and enzymes. If we go for a 10-minute stroll after our larger meals, that can go a long way. So I spend a good amount of time on discussing exercise, finding things you love, where to put it in the day, how to fuel it, and more.
Yes. And I'm sure for you, it's weight bearing exercise as well, right? To keep the bones and the muscles strong and to help with our insulin sensitivity. Yeah.
I was going to say, and adrenals. I'm not doing a lot of those HIIT workouts or going all out at Orange Theory anymore, because those would just create some of my biggest spikes. And
it's yes. And those are, and that's a good point, because it does depend on what age and what stage you're at. And and those workouts, we had Deborah Atkinson on here about 4 or 5 episodes. Again, that was a great information of a podcast, is talking about midlife and how our body and our adrenals are impacted by certain forms of exercise. And she even said it's okay to do a HIIT now and then, but it shouldn't be part of our regular repertoire. We do it maybe because we enjoy it, but steady in steady state really is the best for blood sugar. And, we can amp it up a little bit with some heavier weights, because that does dump a little cortisol. So that's enough stress without it being too overly stressed, but we're getting so many benefits with that as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. So that's the framework I'm keeping in the back of my mind as I have discussions with clients, and identifying which area we need to dig deeper or do some lab tests on or support nutritionally or with supplements. And in the end, reaching success more efficiently and more clear and longer term.
Really good. Yes. I like how that and how that framework stacks up. Really good. So how would you say, as we age, our long-term health, obviously with type 1 diabetes, because that's our focus, is there any changes as far as what should be on our plate or the way that we balance our meals? Is there any difference as we age?
I certainly think so. I somewhat touched on this, but as we age, our protein needs actually go higher.
Mm.
And it's almost like it's with caution, because what if our kidneys are taxed and we don't know it? How often do we get our
Right.
kidneys tested, right? We had this
Right. We've
discussion
had this
before
discussion. Mm-hmm.
too. But it is really important that we are eating enough protein to support our bones and to support our muscle mass, to maintain our metabolism, um, and also blood sugar control. So I think as we age, our ratios of protein to fiber to fat, I call fiber carbohydrate, I use those interchangeably,
Mm-hmm.
shift a little. And it also depends on how active we are and so forth. But I think each season of life has a new chapter on how we manage our type 1. And it just takes a moment to step back, reflect, make sure we're managing what we're trying to monitor, looking at our data and course correct the next day. And to have podcasts like this and conversations and ask questions so you
Mm-hmm.
can really think through, like, should I tweak anything here and there? I don't think the changes are drastic, not
Mm-hmm.
by any means, but each season of life with type 1 diabetes is very different compared to, I think of my son's best friend was diagnosed last week. And
Mm.
that was one of the first friends that I've ever experienced being recently diagnosed. But I told the mom his insulin needs are going to be really drastic because of the amount of growth hormone that
Mm.
is in his body compared to me at 40 years old, compared to a woman who's pregnant. We all know those trimesters vary with
Mm-hmm.
insulin needs and so forth. But
Mm-hmm.
I think macros need to continue to shift in either direction with age, but usually protein goes up and carbohydrates go down
Mm.
around this perimenopause and menopause season. I did say too, like, I hope we're eating 3 meals a day. I think,
Yeah.
according to research, I hope most people are eating 3 meals a day, but doesn't mean everyone has to. And I
Mm.
did a TEDx talk, and one of my recommendations was I love evidence-based research, but we need to take that research and try it on like an elephant and see how it works for us. And
Mm.
when we have 3 meals a day, it's an opportunity to spread out the protein needs.
Mm.
Um, over 3 courses, but I know a lot of people will do a little more fasting and menopause or later, and it might turn into 2 meals a day. But again, try to space 3 sittings of food to make sure you're getting that muscle synthesis to maintain metabolism health and so forth.
Yeah, yeah, you bring up a good point with the protein, because I've been asked about that as well, as far as intermittent fasting as being part of their protocol, and
Yeah.
it does help with insulin sensitivity in general. I mean, it's probably more beneficial maybe for type twos, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because that is something they have to be more aware of, really what their body's producing or having to overproduce with insulin. But is it advantageous for or is it as far as getting the protein, I think that's where women especially can fall short. We tend
Yeah.
to eat small meals anyway. If you saw
Hmm.
my plate, you wouldn't think that.
I know.
I eat big plates of food. I mean, lots of vegetables, a good healthy, portion of protein and some healthy fats. So, it's all relative as far as what's on the plate and,
Yeah.
what's going to satisfy us. But it probably is typically harder to get that protein in without a really, really dialed in strategy if
Yeah.
you're skipping meals.
Yeah. And I think you were also getting to a question, is fasting better for type 2s than type 1s? And it
Mm,
goes back to that second pillar of routines, and it's what routine works best for you. And
yeah.
I was just looking, I posted a new study from the American Heart Association, just early April, and they said research for an 8-hour time eating. So people will fast for 16 hours and they'll strive to eat within 8 hours. So that's called 16-8. It's a popular way to fast. But this
Hmm.
study said, those who only eat in an 8-hour window have 91% risk of cardiovascular death. And I was really
Mm,
surprised by that because there's so much research favoring intermittent fasting. But
hmm.
again, when I'm a coach and I'm coaching a client, it's a tool that I pull out when the tool's needed. And it might be a daily tool. but it's not for everyone. And it's not
Yeah.
the first thing to use for sure. But I was surprised that there was such negative 91% risk of death. That's
That's
huge.
that's a
But
big statistic. Yeah.
I was looking at the study. I think it was more obese people type 2. And as you may know, with insulin resistance, it can be helpful to have a bedtime snack to break that insulin resistance and
Right.
put insulin on board through the night. So there can be this can be a biased study. But
Yeah.
again, the fact of the matter is, it's a tool. Try it on like an outfit, see how it fits. And I
Yes.
would say 5 years ago, around 2020, I was had a full plate with the kids home and so forth. I was intermittent fasting almost 16 hours every day because I just needed that constant. But now that I'm in this perimenopause system where I feel my hormones shifting a little more loudly, is the word I'll use,
Hmm. Hmm.
I really want to protect my cortisol and I step away from fasting because fasting can be a layer of stress. So again,
Mm,
it's a tool that can be used seasonally,
yeah.
weekly, monthly, every few years, and so forth.
Hmm.
So I just
It's
want
another, yeah, and it's another reason to talk with an expert like yourself
to, yeah,
because we are all so different.
yeah,
I think, because that's the trend, all these different things that we're seeing, the GLP-1s and the intermittent
yeah.
fasting craze, all these things that are working for, this one's sister and this one's coworker. And we all have that girlfriend or friend, or,
Yeah.
and this is not just a girl thing, but just because it seems to be working for somebody, you got to know the whole story. You got to really know the whole bio individuality of
Mhm.
them, and that's their story. But that doesn't mean it's going to be your story. And guess what? You're going to turn around and blink, and then things will change again because
Yeah.
it's constantly. Yeah, I mean, our bodies are constantly shifting. I think especially for women, just based on our hormones and different
Yeah.
stages of life. Yeah, most
Yeah.
definitely. So what about I want to close too with insulin resistance. What's a good strategy? I know that's a wide open question.
Yeah.
That it's a big question I'm noticing, and I just mentioned the GLP-1s because I know it's definitely being used for type twos. Because the side bonus effect is obviously weight loss, but I
Yeah.
do know of some type ones that are starting to look into using these to kind
Yeah.
of boost, because that is a hormone. The
Yeah.
GLP-1, those antagonists are natural hormones. So have you seen this being used?
Yeah. I'm glad you're bringing this up because I think the treatment for type 1 diabetes, I know it is. It's evolving. So I went to a really fun research update last week and it was put on my local chapter for
Mm.
JDRF. I used to be a board member for them and now I'm just a very active volunteer. And I went to this research update and they had someone from the headquarters come in and just share about some of the studies they're seeing. And there's some really good stuff coming out. And it's not just like smarter, better insulin pumps that's going to also have glucagon in it to support lows, but things like smart insulin and and vaccines to delay the onset of type 1 diabetes. If people test positive for any antibodies, it is consistent and confident that it can delay the disease by 2 years, but they're finding it's delaying it sometimes by decades. So it was a
Mm.
really cool update. But one of the updates included a dual management plan for type 1 diabetes, including the GLP-1s, the Victoza, the Ozempic, and so forth. And I am very transparent as always, but I've actually been on Ozempic for almost 5 years. And why did I get
Okay.
on it? So, and
Mhm.
I think this should be advertised. At first, I was really quiet about it because again, I went to my endocrinologist. I asked for it. And she said, I'm not going to give it to many of my patients, but I'll give it to you because you're really in tune with your type 1 diabetes. I will say
Mhm.
there is a huge caveat. You can have a very dangerous low taking this medication with type 1
Okay.
diabetes. You can have like my first low was like a freight train. It just dropped so fast and
Mm.
heavy. And it was scary. But this is one caution that my endocrinologist is like, I'm not going to give this to every patient and I'll give it to you. And I've been on it for a while. And again, I'm not sure about the number of years, but a long time. So why did I get on it? So I went to this dinner. It was a diabetes educator chapter that I was part of, also in Columbus, Ohio. And the group was lovely. It was like various walks of life, but a lot of the practitioners there were also type 1 diabetics. And there was a nurse
Mm.
practitioner and a nurse that I was friends with. And we were sitting down for the dinner and whatever the presentation was not on GLP-1s. And they both somehow brought up, oh, yeah, I'm taking Victoza or I'm taking another flavor of this medicine. And I was like, well, why? And they're like, well, it keeps my blood sugars really sticky. And I find that it really supports my mood because blood sugars are just so steady with more ease. I would say none of us, and my feedback over the years, none of us will say that the medication made us lose weight, but it's there replacing a hormone that our pancreas does not produce. So when we're diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, we don't just lose insulin. We lose other important hormones. And one of those is amylin. And amylin slows down the digestion of our food, helping with satiety. We just don't simply have that with type 1 diabetes. So it's kind of replacing it in that way. And I went on it. I felt more freedom managing my type 1 and have continued to use it. It is very tricky and very hard to get insurance to cover it. But with JDRF and this research update, them opening the conversation that it needs to be utilized with type 1 diabetes will help with that insurance coverage. But I think it's going to be a bigger conversation and a bigger tool more and more. But there's also ways we can stimulate our own GLP-1 factors, simply consuming olive oil instead of canola oil, having those high fiber and protein meals to support satiety and so forth. But now I think I'm getting off your actual question.
Yeah,
but
I appreciate that. And this comes right back around to those consistent habits and the GRACE framework you're talking about, because it starts with that. It really does start with looking at the high view of what we're doing. Again, not perfection. There is no perfection for any of us. But just getting an understanding of really what we're doing at the time, what we're consistent with, and what we can feel like we can do consistently, the low-hanging fruit that doesn't cause stress, that makes us feel fulfilled. And, it's something that I've noticed when you find your routine, because I like the word routine. I tend to be a routine person as well. Consistency is good. Your body likes to be on a kind of hum along. It knows what to expect. And it's more, it's what's the word I was looking for? I was going to say it was more steady. It's just more reliable. We can feel like, again, there's not much with diabetes we can control, but when we can get our hands on these, like the pillars that you mentioned, those are things that we can control. And that's our part of really kind of owning this disease the best we can. Yeah. You brought up some really good points.
One other thing I'll add in is I don't know, because I'm too far into the frame, but I don't know if people realize how often insulin resistance is on a spectrum. And as someone with type 1 diabetes, we can ebb and flow along that spectrum. And then referencing back to my GRACE framework, I think the biggest areas that I do look at if I suspect a type 1 has insulin resistance is what's going on in the gut, what's inflamed, what's the commensals, what's the good and bad bacteria like. And then I also think about the sleep, and then I think about the exercise. So I think of mainly three of those pillars to support that and try to change it. And then try to attack it uniquely, depend on what I see with the person.
Yeah. So, blanket question. So how do we know, living with type 1, if our gut, or really anybody, but specifically, how do we know when our gut is not healthy? Are there specific signs? And I'm going to speak completely honest about this as well, because I've always considered my gut to be healthy. I'm regular. I eat very healthy. I'm, real whole food, doing all the things. But how do we really know? I mean, do you suggest testing just to mark it off your list, especially as we're entering perimenopause, just to get a full list of really what's going on?
Yeah, I do really like stool test. So that's actually stool collection, but I do also like this really simple test. It's a finger prick test, which we all know how to do. And it's called a wheat zoomer. And the wheat zoomer will tell me how leaky, how fragile someone's small intestines gut lining is. It also tells me susceptibility to celiac, gluten sensitivity, wheat sensitivity. And it also tell me if there's any strong imbalance in the colon of bacteria producing bad things, endotoxins. And the level of that. So as someone with type 1 diabetes, we have this endotoxin. Endotoxins, a chemical produced by bad bacteria in the colon. Research has shown people with type 1 diabetes have 6 times the amount of something called LPS, People with type 2 diabetes have 2 times the amount of LPS. LPS is very damaging to the body, causes inflammation. There's a study I recently saw, and it showed people with high levels of LPS are more at risk of retinopathy, for example. So that is my number one test. That's usually low cost, very simple to get mailed to your home, ship in the mail, and then get results that will specifically tell me, okay, where do you fall on gut health needs? And going to the bathroom every day is number one. That's a simple, okay, do I go to the bathroom every day? Number two is look at a Bristol chart. You can Google Bristol chart, and you want a well-shaped log going into the toilet of a bowel movement. You don't want pebbles, you don't want floaters, you don't want mush, you want the right color. And optimizing gut health can go a long way with sex hormone balance and menopause and symptoms of menopause, because our bacteria helps metabolize estrogen. And if that bacteria isn't existent or completely out of balance, it can dictate a lot. And there's ways to correct it. But it just depends on what someone's results are on how to strategize to fix it.
Yes. I love tests. Yes. Yeah. Why guess? Right.
Yeah.
Get the facts, right? Data is important.
I just want to add too, tests can, like, even just talk about this, people are like, oh, geez, Louise, I'm overwhelmed. I barely make it to the endo. When I work with clients, I take one at a time to see if there's anything needed more. Like, people are like, oh gosh, she said those 3 tests. I got to do them all. And most of the time I try not to. Yeah. I try to just see the need, and a good practitioner will only select ones that are needed. There's one doctor in the area, I get all of his patients, and I'm like, why did he test you for everything? This is $10,000 worth of labs, and it's, a doctor should not test for everything.
Good point. Yeah. That's definitely something to advocate for. Awesome. Yeah. Well, gosh, I don't know about the listeners, but I've got a list of things I want to talk to my doctor about, my endo, right? Because this is important. The body is one system, it's whole body. So it's like you say, it shouldn't be practiced in a silo separately. And it's important to get down to the system, how it's kind of working together and those hormones. And ultimately, we want sensitive insulin, right? Insulin that works for our favor. Absolutely. Works for us, not against us. So really good. And like the tests that you mentioned, those are things I'll definitely, if we could get some more information, and I would like to share that with our listeners, myself included, because this is bringing up a lot of really interesting things that I think, again, getting the information and finding out is a whole lot easier than walking through life and wondering or suffering in some cases. Yeah.
I would recommend simply, though, is I'll give you links, but the wheat steamer is usually the best place to start, and it's the simplest one to perform. So I'll send you a link.
Awesome. Well, definitely look for that in the show notes here today. Do you have any closing remarks? I feel like we could have talked about this all day. We went on a lot of different, and I love your GRACE framework. I believe in all of what you shared. It's really good. I appreciate you coming here and explaining it to us and giving us examples of it. And giving the listeners some great FYIs for sure.
Yeah. I think my closing remarks is, really lean on the community that none of us asked to be part of, but we're lucky to have. And to not hesitate to speak up and ask questions. And honestly, don't hesitate to reach out to me for clarification, or if you really think I can help you, because I'm really passionate about just changing the status quo. I watched my dad suffer with too much, and I want to stop that from anyone else. Yeah. And it's Melissa, really I'm so excited we connected. I saw you in a Zoom chat, and I was like, you're familiar. So I feel really blessed to have the opportunity to have this conversation with you.
Yes, right back at you. And I'd love to invite you back for some more shows. Yeah, we can. And you know what? This is good. This kind of brings up a good opportunity too. And I'll be linking all of your information, your contact information, your website, and your handle on Instagram. And reach out to Kelly or myself. I'm at Type 1 in Midlife is the podcast, obviously, but I'm at Abundant Health with Melissa. So you can go to the website, but leave us questions, comments, show ideas. Maybe there's something that this conversation opened up for you that you want us to kind of dive in deeper, or just reach out to Kelly. I'm sure she would love to hear from you and to learn more about really what specific help you might need.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Yes. And we'll be back in here next week. Stay tuned for our next episode. Bye for now. Thanks for tuning in to the Type 1 and Midlife podcast. And be sure to subscribe, rate, and review right here on iTunes. And you're invited to connect with our Type 1 and Midlife community on the free Honey Health app. Here we discuss the podcast topics in a group chat, a chance for you to ask questions and take action on what we share here on the show. You can find the app link to download for free right here in the show notes. And for free resources, you can visit me at abundanthealthwithmelissa.com. And your support means so much. Thank you.